The demography and the studies of the population is the social science we examine. So as a demographer, as myself, we examine the three major topics in the very wide definition. The first one is the size and the composition. The size means the number of individuals. So as I made an example just before, the size of the classroom and the number of the people in Jonesboro, in Arkansas, or the United States, that will be one matter because the size is a power. I'll cover a little bit later. And the composition is structure of the population, which means we can see that how many people in some specific degree of the education, for example. The elementary school graduates at their best education, and the high school graduates, and the proportion of the college graduate, that will be a very big topic of the development of the society and the social capital in that society, for example. So these will be a very big topic in the population studies. And the changes. So 5 years ago, or the 30 years ago, or back in 60 years ago, the structure of the composition of the population in Jonesboro, again, for example, in the United States, the age structure and ethnicity and their gender, their co-residential union or the formal marriage, cohabitation, or others, these will be very different from the very long time ago, or 20 years ago, or these days. And also the relationship among the size and the composition. The size of the population. So in the United States, the population grew a lot, and the increase of the population consists of the immigration, for example, and the fertility of newborn babies, and the decrease of the population, such as out-migration, or the death of the people. So these will be all very relevant to each other because the size of the composition, these might be relevant with the education because the highly educated people may or may not have the more number of the babies, for example. So these will be all connected with each other instead of existing as independent factors of the population. So the size and composition and the changes in the population composition and the relationship among those population compositions will be very important topics of the population studies. What we examine, three topics. These are the three topics we examine. So again, these are more details, like the population size and the increase and the decrease and the population processes. So we could see the relationship and the trends and the spatial distribution, which is how many people are in a specific area or specific the range of the places or administrative places. And these will be also the topic as where people are located and why. And the population structure, as we could see, the composition of the population, and the population characteristic as demographics. So these will be very important topic because the governors and even marketing and the corporations and the business leaders, they all want to know. So for example, if you use any of the websites, they will keep track of your information so that they can provide the very specific marketing so that you can purchase more of their items. So these will be always. So far in the past and the current in the future, this type of information will be always very important for every people. And the population is important. I strongly argue that the population is very important and some topics are very important. But we'll tackle, so as a social science class, you'd tackle that why. Okay, why these are very important, or how these factors could be very important in these days. So one criteria we could see was, as I just told you, in the marketing, their demographic information is very important because based on your age and based on your income, education, or your interest, your purchasing power or your purchasing style will be very important, very different to each other. So that will be one possibility, but let's see some more details. One example. So I think you all watched the Avengers movie, one Marvel movie, and the Captain America was fighting with Thanos and saying that he could do this all day. But only one. So having only very tiny number of the military or troops, and if they encounter the opponents or the enemy, having very small number means a very small size of the power. In case that number of the people or small size of the people is consists of very qualified military troops or something, they may offset these types of small number of the population. But in general, the small size of the number of the population is connected with the very weak power of the country or that group. However, just in case you are playing the game, if you just have one unit in your group, or your party will be very, very weak. But if you have many types of the numbers and many jobs and many list of the categories and many different jobs here, then you have more flexibility to oppose to the enemy in others. So that's why the population has been a very important topic for the national leaders and the marketing and all other types of the bodies of the agencies of the society. So that's it about why the size of the population is very important one compared with other topics. And also the size of the population, we are living in the globe, in the earth, and we are not living in the space yet. So the size of the people is very, very closely related with the food and the water, housing and residential area, and the environmental issues we could see as a very abnormal temperature in these days, and energy. We are trying our best to have the sustainability in our environment and all kind of the resources. So again, in these matters, the size of the population is always a very big factor we need to consider for any kind of the decisions. Alright, so larger N, which means if for example, in Jonesboro, if we have 10 times more people, we may need to share some number of the resources. But anyway, that will be the more number of people who can pay the tax, and that will be the richer budget. So more people living in Jonesboro will accelerate the development of the city. So that's why the people, the local government and the governor, they want to see how they can increase, how they can motivate the people come into the city, at least for the residential area, for the taxations. So, not in this class. So we will not deal with these topics in this class, but the population, as you could see, these are very, very relevant with the numbers. So the very, very pure and the formal studies of the population, and these are very, 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 very deeply relevant with the mathematics. But don't worry about that. So I will not cover this type of the very, very fancy mathematical models, but we will cover a very small types of a very tiny range of the mathematics. So I will add more and more contents in so that I can help you to make the calculations. But anyway, these are these will be very basic calculation, so you may not need to worry a lot about that. So again, the population size and the composition, which is the first topic of the major topics of the population studies. So absolute size. So again, the size of the composition. Absolute size means the how many people, the number of the people or the size of the population. The distribution is how far spread out, or how densely concentrated together in that area. For example, in Jonesboro, how many people are living in the Jonesboro, how many far, or how spread out the people are living in the Arkansas. They will be also be topic of the population. And the density, how many people within the specific unit, or within one square mile, how many people are living in that area. So for example, in the metropolitan city like New York, and the closer one is Memphis or the St. Louis, we may see the more people living in some specific unit of the area. But in Arkansas, many of the towns in Arkansas, there will be the smaller number of the people living in a specific unit of the people, a range of the unit. And this is the Nine Dragon City in their language, the Kowloon in the Hong Kong city. That was very, very famous to have the highest number of the population density, because we can see that in very small and very specific size of land, you can see the many people were living in the area. And also in the other example, the Bangladesh has the highest number of the population density, which means there are 1,200 people living in 1 square kilometer. Maybe the kilometer is not very intuitive for you, so the square mile, the density per square mile, India has very high level, but still the Bangladesh in 2014 had the highest the population density. So we would see that there are there are very high levels of the concentration of the people living in the Bangladesh, because of the land size and the composition of the land of the livable or the residential area. So there are many of the compositions we can see in the population studies. So as I told you, I came from South Korea, and in this summer I'm staying in South Korea, and I came from Seoul, which is the capital city, and this is a very, very dense area. However, I was born in a rural town on the rural area. So like that, compared with the Seoul, which is the capital and the metropolitan city, there are very dense residential area, but there are not the dense area in the rural part of the world in the South Korea. And this is the bar, the town of the graph. The taller town and taller bar means the higher number of people. And you can see in some towns and in some metropolitan cities, there are many people, but otherwise, other places, there are a small number of people. Alright, so not only the Korea or other places in the European countries, the dot and each dot represent the 1,000 inhabitants or the residents in that city. You can see that most people are concentrated in the Western Europe instead of the Northern Europe or the Eastern Europe. And in the United States, maybe the Arkansas is around here, right? The Memphis and Arkansas here, and most of the cities, more than 1,000 people in that area. These are concentrated in the east part, in the middle, and the west coast. So these are very big differences in the population distribution. And again, in the worldwide, there are more people in the Asia and the China, Japan, Korea, India, European countries, and the United States. So these are some of the dense area we can see in terms of the population composition. And also the population trends. So as we had a very small number of population long before, but there will be the more people. There will be the more people in the future. So I will cover more details in the population growth part, but based on the scenario of the uprising and the normal and the downsizing, anyway, there will be the changes of the population size in the future, and that will be also a very big topic of the population studies. Anyway, we are living in the Earth, on the Earth, which means on the Earth globe. That is our limitation of the residential area. But like the Elon Musk and even very innovative science leaders, if they invent some ways to live outside of the Earth, maybe we will encounter the new topics. But anyway, so far we are living on the Earth, so we are limiting our discussions of the living on Earth. That will be our limitation. All right, so I will check in another video.